the stagecoach lurched to a stop, red dust billowing up like smoke from a dying fire. Eleanor Hart pressed her handkerchief against her nose, squinting through the haze at what should have been her new beginning. The New Mexico territory stretched endless and unforgiving beneath the late afternoon sun, every surface coated in that same rusty powder that had worked its way into the seams of her traveling dress 3 days ago. "Cibola Creek, miss," the driver called down, his voice rough as the leather reins in his hands. "End of the line." Eleanor gathered her carpetbag and the small trunk that held everything she owned. 2 dresses, her teaching certificates, a Bible that had been her mother's, and a box of white chalk she'd bought with her last coins in Santa Fe. The driver helped her down, his calloused hand briefly supporting her elbow before he turned back to unload her belongings. The town looked smaller than promised. A single main street ran between weathered buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support. The general store, a saloon with its doors already swinging despite the early hour, a boarding house with yellowed curtains, and there, at the street's end where the employment letter had said it would be, stood the schoolhouse. Eleanor's breath caught, even from this distance. She could see the chain wrapped around the door handles, the padlock hanging heavy as judgment. A piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, was tacked to the door. She walked toward it, her boots clicking on the hard-packed earth. Behind her, she heard the stagecoach driver muttering to his horses, preparing to leave. The few townspeople visible seemed to melt away as she passed a woman pulling her child inside the millinery shop. 2 men suddenly very interested in the grain prices posted outside the feed store. The silence grew thick as desert honey. At the schoolhouse door, Eleanor read the notice, her gloved fingers trembling as she traced the bold letters, "Closed by order of the Town Council for Public Safety." "Miss Hart, I presume." She turned to find a man watching her from astride a bay stallion. Everything about him spoke of prosperity, the silver conchos on his saddle, the fine wool of his vest despite the heat, boots that had never seen a day's honest dirt. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture both polite and somehow possessive. "I'm Barrett Cole," he said, dismounting with practiced ease. "I own the Double Bar C Ranch. The council president mentioned we were expecting a new school teacher." "Yes, I'm Eleanor Hart." She kept her voice steady, though questions crowded her throat. "Perhaps you could explain why the school is locked. My letter of employment said classes were to begin Monday next." His smile was patient, the kind reserved for children and Easterners who didn't yet understand how things worked out here. "There's been some trouble, Miss Hart. Nothing for you to concern yourself with. But the council felt it best to delay the school opening until certain elements are dealt with." "Elements." Rafe Moreno. He said the name like spitting tobacco juice. "A bandito who's been terrorizing the territory, stealing cattle, threatening honest folk. The council worried about the children's safety with him still at large." Eleanor glanced back at the locked door. In her experience, men who stole cattle rarely bothered with schoolhouses. "How long has the school been closed?" 2 months, give or take." Barrett Cole stepped closer, and she caught the scent of bay rum and leather. "But don't you worry. I've been authorized by the council to make you an offer. The Double Bar C could use a teacher for the ranch children. You'd have private quarters, good meals, protection, just until this unpleasantness is resolved." The word protection hung in the air like a fishhook, baited and waiting. "That's very generous, Mr. Cole. But I was hired to teach all the children of Cibola Creek, not just—" "The town children can wait a few weeks." His interruption was smooth as oil. "Their parents understand the situation. In fact, they'd likely be grateful knowing you're safe at the ranch rather than alone in town with a dangerous man about." Eleanor noticed movement near the water trough, a shadow that might have been a man, there and gone before she could focus on it. She thought of her empty purse, the long journey that had brought her here, the promises she'd made to herself about this new life. "I appreciate your concern. Mr. Cole, Perhaps I could see the boarding house first. I'd like to wash the travel dust off before making any decisions. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Donnelly's place isn't what you're used to. I'm sure. Rough men, thin walls. The double bar C has a guest room with a proper lock. Nevertheless, I'd like to see my options. For a moment. Something else looked out through Barrett Cole's eyes, something that reminded her of her late father's business partners. Men who smiled while calculating profits in other people's misfortunes. Then it was gone, replaced by that patient, paternal concern. Of course, I'll escort you there myself. Can't have our new school teacher walking alone with desperados about. He took her trunk before she could protest, loading it into his wagon with movements that brooked no argument. After you've seen the accommodations in town, my offer will stand. The children at the ranch do need learning. Miss Hart, and I protect what's mine. The last words were quiet, but Eleanor heard them clear as church bells. She climbed into the wagon, her teaching certificate folded in her bag like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. As they rolled down Main Street, she saw curtains twitch, faces appear and disappear in windows. No one waved, no one smiled. At the edge of town, near the livery stable, that same shadow moved a man in a dark coat who watched their wagon pass. For just a moment, their eyes met. His were darker than coffee, darker than the coming night, but not unkind. Then Barrett Cole clicked his tongue at the horses, and the moment broke like spun sugar. The boarding house squatted between the barber shop and an abandoned assayer's office. Mrs. Donnelly, a thin woman with nervous hands, showed Eleanor a room that was exactly what Barrett Cole had implied: narrow bed, water-stained walls, a window that didn't quite close. The price was dear for what it offered. But it was in town, near the locked school, near the children she'd come to teach. "I'll take it," Eleanor said, ignoring Barrett's disapproving look. "You sure about that, Mrs. Donnelly wrung her apron. "Mr. Cole's offer is generous. His ranch is the safest place in the territory." "Safe from what, exactly?" The woman's eyes darted to Barrett, then away. "Why, from Rafe Moreno, of course, the outlaw." But her voice caught on the word outlaw, like fabric snagging on a nail. After Barrett Cole left, promising to check on her tomorrow, warning her again about the dangers of town, Eleanor sat on the thin mattress and unpacked her box of chalk. 24 pieces, white as bones, white as promises. She held one up to the fading light from the faulty window. Outside, she heard boots on boardwalk, the creak of sign chains, a dog barking somewhere distant, normal town sounds, yet underneath them ran a current of wrongness, like a river flowing backward. She thought of the locked schoolhouse, the nervous townspeople, Barrett Cole's proprietary smile. She thought of the shadow by the water trough, those dark eyes that had looked at her without calculation. Eleanor stood and walked to the window. In the street below, nothing moved but dust devils spinning in the twilight. Yet she felt watched, not threatened, exactly, but observed, measured, perhaps, by someone trying to determine what manner of woman had come to Cibola Creek. She raised the piece of chalk to the window glass and wrote in careful teacher's script, "I am here to teach." The words stood out pale against the coming dark. Tomorrow she would wash them away. But tonight they were declaration and promise both. Whatever game was being played in this town, whatever Barrett Cole wanted, whatever Rafe Moreno had or hadn't done, she had come here with a purpose. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound raised goosebumps on her arms. Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter and prepared for bed, though sleep seemed as far away as the home she'd left behind. Through the gap in the window came the scent of sage and dust, and something else, the faint smell of chalk dust that might have been her imagination, or might have been a memory of classrooms yet to be. The lamp flame flickered as she turned it down, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In that dim light, She thought she saw a figure pass by her window. Pause. Move on. But when she looked directly, the street was empty except for her own reflection, ghostly in the glass. And those chalked words that seemed to glow with their own light. I am here to teach. The night settled over Cibola Creek like a held breath, and Eleanor Hart began her wait for morning, unaware that her simple declaration had already started ripples in the still water of the town's carefully maintained silence. The wagon arrived at precisely 6 o'clock, as Barrett Cole had promised. Eleanor had been awake since before dawn, watching the town come alive through her window, shopkeepers sweeping their stoops, cowboys heading to the saloon for what they called breakfast, women hurrying past with baskets covered in checkered cloth. No children, though. The streets remained remarkably empty of young voices. Miss Hart, the driver, a weathered man with kind eyes, helped her into the wagon. "Mister, Cole sends his regards. Says to tell you dinner's at 7 sharp. The Double Bar C Ranch sprawled across the valley like a small kingdom. Whitewashed buildings clustered around a main house that rose 2 stories, its windows glinting gold in the evening sun. Ranch hands moved between corrals and barns with practiced efficiency, their spurs singing against the packed earth. Everything spoke of order, prosperity, and control. Barrett Cole waited on the veranda, dressed for dinner in a black coat that made his silver hair gleam. "Welcome to the Double Bar C. Miss Hart, I trust your night in town convinced you of the wisdom of my offer." Eleanor allowed him to help her down, noting how his hand lingered a moment too long at her elbow. The accommodations were adequate. "Mr. Cole, though I confess I'm curious why a man of your apparent influence couldn't simply unlock the schoolhouse doors." His smile tightened. "The council voted. I'm just one voice among 7, though I carry some weight. Come, let me show you to your room. You'll want to freshen up before dinner." The guest room was everything the boarding house wasn't: a 4-poster bed with clean linens, a porcelain wash basin, curtains that actually met in the middle. Through the window, she could see the bunkhouse, the stables, and beyond them, the vast expanse of rangeland that Barrett Cole claimed as his own. "The ranch children take their lessons in the library," he said from the doorway. 6 of them, ages 7 through 14. Good stock, all of them. Their parents work for me. And their parents are comfortable with the school being closed. They trust my judgment." He pulled out his pocket watch, a heavy gold piece that caught the light. "Dinner in 30 minutes. We dress for the evening meal at the Double Bar C." Eleanor unpacked her better dress, a dark blue wool that was too warm for the climate, but proper enough for whatever game they were playing. As she pinned up her hair, she thought about trust, how Barrett Cole spoke of it like currency, something to be earned or bought or demanded. The dining room could have graced any Eastern mansion. Crystal glasses, silver polished to mirror brightness, china so thin she could see her fingers through it. 2 servants moved silent as shadows, filling glasses and setting covered dishes on the sideboard. Barrett sat at the head of the long table, gesturing for her to take the seat to his right. "I hope you don't find our frontier hospitality too rustic," he said, as the first course appeared a clear soup that had no business existing this far from civilization. "It's very elegant. Mr. Cole. One might almost forget we're in the territory." "That's the idea." He lifted his wine glass. "To civilization, Miss Hart, to bringing light to dark places." She touched her glass to his, but only pretended to sip. "Tell me about Rafe Moreno." Barrett's hand stilled on his soup spoon. "Hardly dinner conversation. Nevertheless, if he's the reason I can't teach the town children, I'd like to know more. When did he arrive in Cibola Creek?" "Arrive?" Barrett laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Men like Moreno don't arrive. Miss Hart, they appear like pestilence. He's been plaguing us for near 6 months now." "And in that time, how many people has he actually harmed?" The question hung in the air like smoke. One of the servants, a young Mexican woman, glanced up from the sideboard, then quickly away. He's stolen cattle, threatened good men, disturbed the peace. Barrett's voice carried the rhythm of a practiced speech. Just last month, shots were fired near the Jenkins homestead. Was anyone hurt? By God's grace, no, but it's only a matter of time. He set down his spoon with careful precision. Miss Hart, you come from back east. You don't understand how thin the line is out here between order and chaos. One bad man can turn a whole town into a battlefield. Eleanor thought of the locked school, the empty streets, the fear that seemed to hang over Cibola Creek like morning fog. And you believe keeping the children from their education maintains order. I believe keeping you safe maintains order. His gray eyes fixed on hers. A young woman, alone. New to town, you'd be a target for a man like Moreno. The council couldn't bear the responsibility if something happened to you. The main course arrived beef so tender it fell apart at the touch of a fork. Vegetables, she couldn't imagine how they'd grown in this dry land. Barrett kept the conversation to safer topics: the ranch's history, his plans for expansion, the new breeding stock he'd brought from Texas. But underneath his pleasant words ran an undercurrent, persistent as a river. I could make this permanent, you know, he said as dessert was served, a delicate custard flavored with vanilla. A private teacher for the Double Bar C. The pay would be generous, the position secure. You'd want for nothing. That's very kind, but I came here to teach all children, not just a fortunate few. Fortune is earned. Miss Hart. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. Their parents work for me because I provide stability, protection, opportunity. Their children benefit from that arrangement. It's the natural order of things. Eleanor set down her spoon, the custard suddenly too sweet. In my experience, Mr. Cole, the natural order often benefits those who define it. His smile was sharp as winter wind. Spoken like a true schoolteacher, idealistic. It's charming, really, but idealism doesn't stop bullets or put food on tables. Neither does a locked schoolhouse. Silence stretched between them, taut as telegraph wire. The servant girl refilled water glasses with hands that trembled slightly. Through the tall windows, Eleanor could see the sun setting, painting the rangeland red as blood. You'll learn, Barrett said finally, his voice soft as a threat. This country has a way of teaching its own lessons. Until then, you're under my protection whether you appreciate it or not. Maria will show you back to your room. The dismissal was clear. Eleanor rose, keeping her spine straight as a ruler. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Cole. It was illuminating. Tomorrow you'll meet the children, he said, not looking at her. 7 o'clock sharp in the library. We prize punctuality at the Double Bar C. Eleanor followed the servant girl Maria down the long hallway. Portraits of stern men and sad-eyed women watched from the walls. Previous generations of Coles who'd claimed this land and held it with iron fists. At her door, Maria paused, glancing back toward the dining room. Miss, she whispered. So quiet, Eleanor almost missed it. The school. It wasn't closed for safety. It was closed because the last teacher asked too many questions. Before Eleanor could respond, Maria was gone, her soft footsteps fading into the shadows of the great house. Eleanor entered her room and locked the door, though she wondered what good locks did when the danger might already be inside. She unpacked her teaching materials, the precious chalk, her lesson books, the blue ribbon that had marked her place in the primer she'd been reviewing. The ribbon was frayed at one end, worn from years of use. She wound it around her fingers, thinking of her students back east, their eager faces and ready questions, thinking of the 6 ranch children she'd meet tomorrow, isolated in their prosperity while town children went untaught. At the window, she looked out across the darkening range. Somewhere out there, Rafe Moreno moved through the shadows, branded an outlaw by men like Barrett Cole. She wondered what questions the previous teacher had asked. She wondered if anyone had answered. A movement caught her eye, a rider on the ridge, silhouetted against the dying light, too far to see clearly, but something in the way he sat his horse, patient and watchful, made her think of that moment by the water trough. Then clouds covered the rising moon, and when they passed, the ridge was empty. Eleanor prepared for bed, folding her good dress carefully, braiding her hair for sleep. But she kept the blue ribbon in her hand, running it through her fingers like a rosary. Tomorrow she would meet the ranch children, would begin the work she'd traveled so far to do. But it wouldn't be enough. It would never be enough while that padlock hung on the schoolhouse door. She blew out the lamp and lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the ranch horses nickering in the stables, cowboys calling to each other as they settled for sleep, the distant howl of coyotes, and underneath it all, the silence where children's voices should have been, heavy as the silver candlesticks on Barrett Cole's perfect table. The blue ribbon whispered between her fingers, soft as promises, frayed as hope. In the morning, she would teach, but tonight she began to plan. The barn smelled of hay and horse sweat, morning sun slanting through gaps in the boards to paint golden stripes across the makeshift classroom. Eleanor had arrived early, before even the ranch hands were stirring, to transform this corner of the stable into something resembling a place of learning. She'd found an old door to serve as a blackboard, propped it against empty barrels, and arranged hay bales in rough rows. "Don't see why we can't use the house library," muttered Jake, the oldest at 14, his voice caught between boy and man. "Smells like horse droppings in here." "Sometimes we learn best in humble places," Eleanor replied, testing her chalk on the door's painted surface. It left a clean white line, bright against the weathered wood. "Besides, I thought ranch children would be comfortable around horses." That earned her a grudging smile from Emma, 12 years old with her father's stubborn jaw. "Pa says you're from back east. You ever even seen a horse before coming here?" "I've seen many things, Emma, including children who ask questions to avoid starting their lessons." Eleanor turned to face her 6 students, Jake and Emma Sullivan, the foreman's children, 10-year-old twins Thomas and Timothy Wells, little Sarah Martinez, just 7, and Samuel Chen, whose father ran the ranch kitchen with quiet efficiency. They watched her with the wariness of children who'd learned to read adult moods like weather signs. She recognized the look from her first days teaching in Boston's factory districts, children who'd seen too much, trusted too little. "Let's begin with names," she said, writing her own on the makeshift board. "I'm Miss Hart. I know your names, but I'd like to know what you prefer to be called. Jake, for instance, is that Jacob?" "Just Jake," the boy said quickly. "Jacob was my grandfather. He's dead." "Jake it is, then." She wrote each name as they told her, taking time with each one, showing them their names had weight and meaning. When she reached Samuel, she carefully formed the letters of his Chinese name alongside the English one when he shyly offered it. "You can write Chinese?" Timothy asked, eyes wide. "Only what Samuel teaches me. Perhaps he'll help us all learn?" She glanced at the boy, who nodded, a smile breaking across his usually solemn face. They were just settling into the rhythm of lessons, basic arithmetic for the young ones, Shakespeare for Jake, geography for all when the barn door creaked open. Eleanor expected Barrett Cole, come to inspect her teaching. Instead, a shaft of morning light fell on packed earth, and when her eyes adjusted, no one was there, only a bundle wrapped in faded cloth, sitting just inside the doorway. The children craned their necks to see. Eleanor approached carefully, aware this could be some kind of test. The bundle was light, tied with twine. Inside, she found 3 boxes of fresh chalk and a note written in careful script. "For the new teacher. The children deserve better than barn doors." No signature, but there was something about the handwriting controlled, educated, but with the particular slant of someone who'd learned to write in Spanish first. "Is it from Mr. Cole?" Sarah asked, clutching her slate. Eleanor doubted Barrett Cole had ever written an unsigned note in his life. I don't know, but we should be grateful for gifts, regardless of their source. She held up the chalk, white and perfect in the morning light. Who wants to try the new chalk? They all did, of course. Soon the barn door was covered in numbers and letters, maps and pictures. Samuel drew Chinese characters and explained their meanings. Emma sketched horses with surprising skill. Even Jake unbent enough to write out a verse from Hamlet, his handwriting better than he'd probably admit to his ranch hand friends. My ma went to school, Sarah said suddenly, in the middle of copying her letters. Before she came here, she says I'm lucky to learn. Your mother is right, Eleanor said. Education is a door that, once opened, can never be fully closed. Is that why they locked the town school? Thomas asked. To keep doors closed. The question hung in the air like dust motes. Eleanor chose her words carefully. I don't know why the school is locked, but I know learning finds a way. It's like water, it seeps through cracks, finds new channels. Pa says it's because of the outlaw. Emma offered. Rafe Moreno. Says he's dangerous. Have any of you seen this outlaw? Eleanor asked, keeping her tone neutral. The children exchanged glances. Jake shifted on his hay bale. Sometimes there's food left for the Mexican families. Blankets in winter. Ma tells them it's charity from the church, but the priest never knows about it. Jake, Emma hissed. You're not supposed to. It's true, Samuel said quietly. My father found good meat left by our door once, when Mr. Cole cut rations. Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The careful story Barrett Cole had constructed showing its seams. I see. Well, mysteries aside, let's return to our lessons. Sarah, show me your letter A again. They worked until the sun was high, the barn growing warm. Eleanor had just called a break for water when boots rang on the packed earth outside. This time, the visitor didn't vanish. Barrett Cole filled the doorway, his gray suit incongruous in the barn setting. His eyes took in the scene the children scattered on hay bales, the door covered in chalk, Eleanor with dust on her dress and straw in her hair. Miss Hart, I expected to find you in the library. The children and I thought fresh air might aid concentration, she said evenly. I hope you don't mind us borrowing your barn. His jaw worked as if chewing something bitter. The house has a perfectly suitable library, with perfectly suitable books that tell perfectly suitable stories. Jake muttered, just loud enough to hear. Barrett's eyes snapped to the boy. You have something to say. Jacob. Jake? Eleanor corrected gently. His name is Jake. The rancher's face darkened. Children, you're dismissed. Miss Hart and I need to discuss proper educational environments. They scattered like quail, but Eleanor caught Samuel pressing something into her hand as he passed a small piece of paper, folded tight. She slipped it into her pocket. You're undermining my authority, Barrett said when they were alone. I offer you civilization, and you choose a barn. I chose a classroom where children feel free to speak. She began gathering slates, not looking at him. They're bright. Mr. Cole. All of them. They deserve what I provide. He stepped closer, and she smelled bay rum and leather, wealth and control. You're new here, Miss Hart. You don't understand the delicate balance required to maintain order. Men like Moreno leave gifts of chalk for children's education. The words escaped before she could stop them. Barrett went very still, and Eleanor felt the danger in that stillness, like the pause before a rattlesnake strikes. You've had contact with him. His voice was soft, deadly. I've had contact with unsigned gifts that help me teach. She met his eyes steadily. If that troubles you, perhaps you should ask yourself why. He grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to show he could. Careful, Miss Hart. Teachers who ask too many questions find themselves on eastbound stages very quickly. Like the last teacher. His grip tightened fractionally. The last teacher forgot her place. Don't make the same mistake. He released her and stepped back, smoothing his vest. You'll use the library tomorrow. If I find you in the barn again, you'll be on the next stage out. Contract or no contract, do we understand each other? Perfectly, Eleanor said, rubbing her wrist. After he left, she unfolded Samuel's note. In a child's careful writing, the man who brings food has kind eyes. Pa says kind eyes don't lie, even when words do. Eleanor looked at the chalk-covered door, at the empty barn that had held, for a few hours, the sound of children learning. She thought of Barrett Cole's hard grip and harder eyes. She thought of gifts left in doorways and food for hungry families. That evening, she returned to the boarding house in town, ignoring Barrett's displeasure. In her room, she found another gift, a Spanish grammar book, its pages worn soft with use. No note this time, but pressed between the pages was a single crane feather, black as midnight, white-tipped like hope. She sat by her window as night fell, watching shadows move in the streets below. Somewhere out there, a man with kind eyes moved through darkness, leaving chalk and books and food where they were needed. Somewhere, Barrett Cole sat in his fine house, planning how to cage her more completely. Eleanor touched the crane feather to her lips, then used it to mark her place in the grammar book. Tomorrow she would return to the ranch, would teach in Barrett's library with its suitable books, but she would also remember the barn, and chalk on rough wood, and children's voices raised in learning despite all attempts to silence them. The moon rose over Cibola Creek, painting the locked schoolhouse silver. Eleanor began to study Spanish by lamplight, preparing for conversations yet to come. The saloon stood quiet in the noon heat, most of its regular patrons still working the range. Eleanor pushed through the batwing doors, her presence drawing immediate attention from the few men nursing warm beer at scarred tables. She'd never entered such an establishment before, but the wanted poster she'd glimpsed through the window had drawn her like a moth to flame. There it was, tacked to the wall between advertisements for patent medicine and a faded calendar. Wanted, Rafe Moreno, $50 reward, cattle theft and assault, armed and dangerous. The sketch showed a man with dark eyes and sharp cheekbones, but it could have been any of 100 men who worked the border ranches. It was the amount that caught her attention. $50 was modest for a truly dangerous criminal. Back east, she'd seen higher bounties on pickpockets. Help you, miss. The bartender, a German named Muller, according to the sign above the bar, watched her with curious eyes. His hands never stopped polishing a glass that already gleamed. I was just... She gestured at the poster. Ah, the desperado. Muller's accent thickened the words. You should not be here. Miss Teacher is not proper place for ladies. Has anyone actually seen him commit these crimes? Muller's hands stilled on the glass. Around them, conversations died. A cowboy at the nearest table suddenly found his beer fascinating. His dangerous question, Muller said finally. Better you should ask about weather. Yes, very dry this year. Eleanor understood the warning, but pressed on. The poster says assault. Who did he assault? One of Cole's men, Durante, but Durante. He leaves town very quick after. No trial, no questions. Muller set the glass down with deliberate care. Please, miss, go now. She left, feeling eyes on her back until she turned the corner. The town seemed to hold its breath in the afternoon heat, shadows sharp as knife edges. She was heading back to the boarding house when it happened. The horse came out of nowhere, a bay mare, eyes rolling white with panic, foam at her mouth. Eleanor heard the pounding hooves, saw the animal bearing down on her, and froze. Time stretched like taffy. She could see death coming at 30 miles an hour, could count the mare's teeth bared in terror. Then hands grabbed her waist, lifting and spinning her out of the path. She felt herself pulled against a hard chest, smelled leather and sage and something wild. The horse thundered past, missing them by inches, her rider sawing uselessly at the reins. Eleanor's rescuer set her on her feet, but kept one steadying hand on her elbow. She looked up into the darkest eyes she'd ever seen, coffee dark, night dark, the eyes from the wanted poster made real and standing close enough to share breath. "You should be more careful," he said. His voice carried the soft consonants of Spanish beneath careful English. "Spooked horses don't stop for schoolteachers." "You're—" She couldn't finish, couldn't reconcile the armed and dangerous man on the poster with the one who just saved her life. "Nobody," he said firmly. "Just a man who doesn't like seeing women trampled." He glanced around the empty street, then back at her. "You're the new teacher, the one asking questions. I'm the one trying to teach children in a barn because men like Barrett Cole." She stopped, suddenly aware of how alone they were. His smile was surprisingly gentle. "Men like Barrett Cole. Yes." He reached into his jacket, and Eleanor tensed. But he only pulled out a folded piece of fabric, a bandana, black with silver embroidery. An ornate M decorated one corner. "You're bleeding," he said, touching the cloth to her cheek. She hadn't even felt the scratch from flying gravel. The touch was light, careful, but Eleanor felt it like a brand. This close. She could see lines around his eyes, evidence of laughter or squinting into sun. Could see his hands were clean, nails neat, not the hands of a man living rough. "Why did you leave the chalk?" she asked. He paused, the bandana still pressed to her cheek. "Children should learn, even barn children, especially barn children." "Mr. Cole says you're a cattle thief." "Mr. Cole says many things." He lowered the bandana, pressed it into her hands. "Keep pressure on it until the bleeding stops." "Wait." But he was already moving. Not running, but walking with purpose toward the maze of alleys behind Main Street. Eleanor stood holding the bandana, blood spotting the fine fabric, watching him disappear. Miss Hart. She turned to find Tom Morrison, the sheriff's deputy, hurrying toward her. Behind him came 3 of Barrett's hands, all armed, all scanning the streets. "We heard there was trouble," Morrison said. His badge caught the sun, temporarily blinding her. "That horse could have killed you. You see who spooked her." Eleanor folded the bandana carefully, tucking it into her pocket. "I saw a frightened animal and kind strangers who helped. Nothing more." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Kind strangers, right." He turned to Barrett's men. "Check the alleys. He can't have gone far." They scattered like hunting dogs, leaving Eleanor with the deputy. Morrison was young, trying to grow into his authority with limited success. Sweat beaded his upper lip despite the badge's shine. "Ma'am, if you saw Rafe Moreno, you need to tell me. He's dangerous." "So everyone keeps saying." Eleanor touched her scraped cheek. "Yet the only danger I've encountered was from a panicked horse. You don't understand. I understand that I was nearly trampled and a man risked discovery to help me. I understand that the same man leaves food for hungry families and chalk for children. If that's what passes for dangerous in Cibola Creek, perhaps we need new definitions." Morrison flushed red. "Mr. Cole won't like hearing you've been fraternizing." "Mr. Cole doesn't own my opinions. Deputy, now, if you'll excuse me, I need to clean this scratch." She walked away, spine straight, the bandana a secret weight in her pocket. Behind her, she heard Morrison directing the search, boot heels ringing on boardwalks as they hunted for a ghost. In her room, Eleanor unfolded the bandana carefully. The embroidery was exquisite, not the rough work of a man living wild, but careful stitches made with patience and skill. She pressed it to her cheek again, and caught that scent of sage and leather. From her window, she could see the search continuing, men with rifles checking water troughs, peering into stables. Barrett Cole had joined them. sitting his stallion like a general surveying troops. His face was granite, his hands tight on the reins. She thought of Rafe's hands gentle on her cheek, steady as they pulled her from danger. Thought of his eyes, holding depth she couldn't fathom. The wanted poster said, "Armed and dangerous," but she'd seen no weapon. The sketch showed a brutal face, but she'd seen unexpected kindness. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs." Donnelly peered in, wringing her hands as always. "Miss Hart, Mr. Cole is asking for you. Says it's urgent." Eleanor folded the bandana, hid it beneath her pillow. "Tell Mr. Cole I'm indisposed. The incident left me quite shaken." "But he insists." "Then he can continue insisting. I'll see him tomorrow at the ranch, as scheduled." "Mrs." Donnelly retreated, and Eleanor heard heated voices below Barrett's commanding tone. "Mrs." Donnelly's nervous protests. Finally. Silence. She pulled out paper and ink, began writing to the placement agency that had sent her here. Not to leave, not yet, but to ask certain questions. About the previous teacher. About the real reason for the school's closure. About what kind of town locked its children away from learning. As she wrote, she touched her cheek where the scratch stung. In her mind, she saw dark eyes and careful hands, heard a voice saying children should learn. She thought of the $50 bounty, too small for a real criminal, just right for an inconvenient man. The bandana lay hidden beneath her pillow, soft as secrets. Outside, the search continued, but Eleanor knew they wouldn't find him. Men like Rafe Moreno knew how to disappear. The question was, would he disappear forever, or would she see those dark eyes again? She sealed her letter, addressed it carefully. Tomorrow she would teach in Barrett's suitable library, would play the proper Eastern teacher. But tonight, she had questions multiplying like summer storms, and a black bandana that smelled of sage and possibility. The moon rose over Cibola Creek, and Eleanor Hart began to understand that truth in the territory wore many faces, and the most dangerous men might be those who sat in fine houses, making laws to suit themselves. The wind carried dust and distant thunder across the ranch veranda where Eleanor sat grading compositions. Barrett Cole stood at the railing, watching the sunset paint his domain in shades of gold and shadow. He'd been building to something all evening. She could tell the way he kept touching his watch, smoothing his vest, clearing his throat without speaking. "Miss Hart," he finally said, not turning from his view. "You've been here 3 weeks now." "Yes." She didn't look up from Samuel's essay about his grandfather's journey from Canton to California. The boy had real talent, though he tried to hide it. "The children have taken to you. Their parents speak highly of your teaching." "They're eager learners." Barrett turned then, and she saw he dressed with particular care his best coat, boots polished to mirrors, a new string tie with a silver clasp. "I've been thinking about permanence, Miss Hart, about the future." Eleanor set down her pen carefully. She'd been expecting this, had seen it building in the way he watched her at dinner. The small gifts that appeared at her door, a tortoiseshell comb, a volume of Wordsworth, a shawl too fine for a teacher's salary. "The territory is growing," he continued, moving closer. "The railroad will come through within 2 years. Cibola Creek will transform from a frontier town to a proper city. It will need the right kind of people, established families, respectability. I'm sure it will prosper under your guidance." He frowned at her neutral tone. "Our guidance, potentially." The word hung between them like a baited trap. Eleanor kept her eyes on the papers, though the words blurred. "I'm offering you something most women in your position would grasp eagerly." Barrett said, "Security, status, a home grander than anything you could have imagined teaching schoolchildren back east. In exchange for marriage, naturally. You'd continue teaching the ranch children if you wished, or not. There would be our own children to consider. In time." Eleanor thought of cages gilded ones were still prisons. That's a generous offer, Mr. Cole. Then you accept. I need time to consider. This is rather sudden. His jaw tightened. Sudden, I've shown you every courtesy, every indication of my intentions. What more could you need to know? Perhaps whether I have feelings for you beyond respect for my employer. Barrett laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Feelings. My dear Miss Hart, this is the territory. Feelings are a luxury we can't afford. I'm offering you protection, prosperity, position. Love is for novels and fools. Then I must be a fool. The words escaped before she could stop them. Barrett's face darkened, and for a moment she saw beneath his civilized veneer to something harder, hungrier. You're waiting for him. It wasn't a question. The outlaw. You think because he played hero once, he's some kind of romantic figure from your Eastern stories. I think nothing of the kind. Don't lie to me. He grabbed her wrist, scattering papers. I know he's been watching you. My men have seen signs, horse tracks where they shouldn't be. That Mexican woman Maria finding mysterious gifts of food. He's circling like a wolf, and you're encouraging it. Let go of me! He tightened his grip instead. Do you know what kind of man Rafe Moreno really is? Shall I tell you about the family he destroyed, the honest rancher he shot? The honest rancher who tried to steal water rights. The voice came from the shadows beyond the veranda. The family who wanted to sell land that wasn't theirs. Barrett released Eleanor, spinning toward the darkness. Show yourself, you coward. Rafe stepped into the lamplight, and Eleanor's breath caught. He looked different than their brief encounter, tired, perhaps, or just allowing her to see past the careful mask. His clothes were dusty but neat, his gun belt worn but well-maintained. He kept his hands visible, away from the weapon. Miss Hart, he said, touching his hat brim. I apologize for the intrusion, but when a man spreads lies about me, I prefer to answer them directly. How dare you? Barrett started forward, but Rafe held up a hand. The Hernandez family owned that riverland for 3 generations. Had the papers to prove it, old Spanish grant, recognized by the treaty. You wanted it for your cattle. When they wouldn't sell, you tried other methods. Lies. Truth, written in the surveyor's own journal, the one you thought burned in that convenient fire. Rafe's eyes never left Barrett's face. I have it, Cole. Every measurement, every boundary marker you moved, every forgery you commissioned. Barrett's hand moved toward his jacket. You're a dead man, Moreno. Probably, but not tonight. Rafe glanced at Eleanor. You asked about feelings. Miss Hart, ask him about feelings. Ask about the last teacher, Miss Catherine Walsh. Ask why she really left. Catherine was unstable, Barrett said quickly. Hysterical, making wild accusations. She refused you, Rafe interrupted. Just like Miss Hart is trying to do politely. Only Catherine was less diplomatic. She threatened to write to the territorial governor about your land schemes. So you had her escorted to the stage in the middle of the night. Told everyone she'd broken her contract. Eleanor stood slowly, her mind racing. Is that why the school is really closed, to keep teachers isolated? Dependent on your protection? Barrett's face was stone. The school is closed for safety. Your safety, Rafe said. Hard to control the narrative when 60 children go home and tell their parents what they learned about land rights and legal boundaries. Get off my land, Moreno. Next time I see you, I'll shoot you myself. Probably. Rafe backed toward the darkness, but his eyes found Eleanor's. The old well. Miss Hart. Where we met. Midnight. If you want those documents Catherine gathered before she left. Then he was gone. Melting into shadow like smoke. Barrett stood rigid, fists clenched, then turned on Eleanor. You will not go. I forbid it. You forbid? Eleanor gathered her papers with shaking hands. By what right? By the right of a man protecting what's his. I am not yours, Mr. Cole, Not your property, not your future wife, not your anything. She faced him squarely. I'm a teacher who came here to educate children. All the children of Cibola Creek. If you can't accept that, then you'll be on the next stage out, just like Catherine. His voice was ice. Choose carefully. Miss Hart, my offer stands until dawn. Accept it, and all this unpleasantness disappears. Refuse, and, well, the territory can be dangerous for a woman alone. Eleanor clutched her papers, Samuel's essay crumpling in her grip. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. He straightened his tie, smoothed his coat, control reasserted like armor. Until dawn, Miss Hart, I trust you'll make the sensible choice. He walked into the house, leaving her alone with the wind and the coming storm. Eleanor sank into her chair, papers scattered around her like fallen leaves. Her hands shook as she gathered them, trying to smooth Samuel's wrinkled essay. The ranch spread before her in the dying light, vast, prosperous, ordered, all of it built on lies and theft, maintained by fear and control. She thought of Catherine Walsh, spirited away in darkness, thought of the locked schoolhouse, the frightened townspeople, the children learning in barns and shadows. She thought of Rafe's eyes in the lamplight, tired but defiant. The old well at midnight. Documents that might prove what she was beginning to suspect, that the most dangerous outlaw in Cibola Creek wore a badge of respectability and ate off china plates. Thunder rumbled closer. Eleanor made her decision. She had 6 hours until midnight, time enough to pack what mattered, to leave letters for the children, to prepare for whatever came next, because one thing was certain come dawn. She would not be Mrs. Barrett Cole. She would be a teacher who chose truth over comfort, freedom over cages, even if that choice led her into darkness with only an outlaw's word as a guide. The first drops of rain began to fall as she went inside. Behind her, thunder crashed like closing doors, and the wind whispered of changes coming fast as desert storms. The market square buzzed with Saturday morning energy farmers hawking produce, wives haggling over fabric, children darting between the stalls like minnows. Eleanor moved through the crowd, basket on her arm, trying to appear merely another woman doing her shopping. But she felt the eyes following her, heard the whispers ripple in her wake. That's her, the teacher who refused Barrett Cole. Heard she was seen with the outlaw. Asking for trouble, that one. Eleanor kept her chin high, selecting apples with careful deliberation. 3 days had passed since her midnight meeting with Rafe at the well. 3 days since she'd read Catherine Walsh's hidden documents. The truth they contained burned in her mind like fever-forged deeds. Stolen surveys. A systematic theft of land from Mexican families who'd held it for generations. Miss Hart. Deputy Morrison appeared at her elbow, badge gleaming despite the dust. Behind him stood 2 of Barrett's men, hands resting on their gun belts. Mr. Cole wants to remind you that the schoolhouse remains closed by order of the town council. I'm aware. She added carrots to her basket. Though I wonder why the deputy sheriff is running errands for a private citizen. Morrison flushed. Mr. Cole is concerned for public safety. Gun! The shout came from across the square. Eleanor turned to see chaos erupting near the grain store, Barrett's men converging on a figure in a dark coat. Weapons drawn. Women screamed. Pulling children behind market stalls. Men dove for cover. Nobody move! Morrison abandoned Eleanor, running toward the commotion. But Eleanor moved. She saw what others missed in their panic, a small girl, maybe 5 years old, frozen in the middle of the square as horses reared and men shouted. The child clutched a cornhusk doll, tears streaming down her face. Eleanor dropped her basket and ran, skirts flying. She scooped up the child just as a spooked horse broke free, its hooves striking sparks where the girl had stood. Eleanor stumbled, clutching the sobbing child, and felt strong hands steady her. The Mission Bell Tower, Rafe whispered against her ear, Get the children there, now! Then he was gone, drawing the pursuit away like a matador with a cape. Eleanor didn't hesitate. Everyone, the mission, get the children to safety. Her teacher's voice cut through panic. Mothers grabbed their children, following Eleanor's lead. She herded them toward the old mission at the square's edge, its thick adobe walls a haven from the chaos. Behind them, gunfire cracked. Eleanor forced herself not to look back, focused on getting the children inside. Other women joined her, the baker's wife, the seamstress, even saloon girls emerging from their establishments to help. Together they gathered every child in sight, pushing them through the mission doors. "Stay down," Eleanor ordered, her voice calm despite her racing heart. "We're going to sing songs until the noise stops. Who knows, she'll be coming round the mountain." Small voices joined hers, trembling at first, then growing stronger. Eleanor moved among them, touching heads, wiping tears, keeping them focused on the song instead of the violence outside. Through the high windows, she could see dust clouds, running figures, the occasional flash of gunfire. Miss Hart, Sarah Martinez, the youngest of her ranch students, tugged at her skirt. "Is Mr. Rafe going to be hurt?" Eleanor knelt beside her. "Why do you call him Mr. Rafe, sweetheart?" "He brings us food sometimes. When Papa has no work, Mama says we're not supposed to tell." Other children nodded. The blacksmith's son, the laundress's daughter children whose families struggled, who knew hunger as more than a word. All of them, apparently, knew the dangerous outlaw as a benefactor who appeared in darkness with flour and beans and sometimes candy for the little ones. A new volley of gunfire made the windows rattle. Eleanor gathered the children closer, raising her voice in another song, but through the melody, she heard something else, Barrett Cole's voice, magnified by the acoustic quirk of the mission courtyard. "I won't tolerate lawlessness in my town. That schoolhouse stays locked until I say otherwise." His town, his law, his decision who learned and who remained ignorant. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a lock. She looked at the children huddled around her ranch children and town children mixed together. No divisions in their fear. This was why the school was really closed. Not for safety, but for control. Keep the children separated, keep their parents divided, keep the truth locked away like Catherine Walsh's documents. The gunfire was moving away, the shouts growing distant. Eleanor stood, decision crystallizing like desert salt. "Children," she said, her voice carrying new authority. "Who wants to help me do something brave?" Every small hand shot up. Eleanor smiled. "Good, because we're going to open your school." The mothers exchanged glances, worried, hopeful, uncertain. Mrs. Chen, Samuel's mother, spoke first. "Miss Hart, the council." "The council locked our children out of education to protect Barrett Cole's interests." Eleanor moved to the mission door. Peering out, the square was emptying. The chase moving toward the edge of town. "I have documents proving he's stolen land, forged deeds, driven out rightful owners. The school is closed to keep you from learning your rights." "Even if that's true," the baker's wife said slowly, "what can we do? He owns half the town, controls the other half." "He controls through fear and separation." Eleanor turned back to them. "But look around you. When danger came, what did we do? We came together. We protected all the children, not just our own. That's what he fears most, unity." She pulled Catherine Walsh's letter from her pocket, the one that had been hidden with the documents. Read aloud Catherine's words about teaching children to question, to think, to understand their rights, about Barrett's marriage proposal and his rage when refused, about the night riders who escorted her to the stage with warnings never to return. When she finished, the mission was silent except for children's breathing and distant shouts from the streets. "I'm going to that schoolhouse," Eleanor said. "I'm going to remove that chain and that lying notice. If Barrett Cole wants to stop me, He'll have to do it in daylight, in front of the whole town. Who's with me? Sarah Martinez stood first, small and fierce. I am. Me too, Samuel Chen joined her. Then Emma and Jake Sullivan, who'd snuck away from the ranch to visit the market, one by one. The children stood. Their mothers looked at each other, a lifetime of caution warring with newfound courage. Then Maria, the servant from Barrett's own house, stepped forward. See, she said simply. Yes, for our children. The dam broke. Women who'd kept silent for years found their voices, their courage multiplying as they stood together. Even the saloon girls joined them, defiant in their bright dresses. Eleanor opened the mission doors. The square was nearly empty now. The conflict moved elsewhere. Perfect. They walked together, women and children. A river of determination flowing toward the locked schoolhouse. People emerged from hiding to watch their passage. Men stepped out of doorways, some joining the march, others simply bearing witness. At the schoolhouse, Eleanor stood before the chained doors. The lying notice fluttered in the breeze, closed by order of the town council for public safety. She gripped the paper with both hands and tore it down, ripping it into pieces that scattered like snow. The crowd murmured approval. Someone handed her a crowbar, the blacksmith, his face grim but determined. This is illegal, Deputy Morrison pushed through the crowd, but alone now, his backup chasing shadows at the town's edge. I'll arrest you all. For what? Eleanor asked. For wanting our children educated, for refusing to let one man's greed keep them ignorant. Arrest us then. Fill your jail with mothers and children. Show everyone what law means in Cibola Creek. Morrison's hand hovered over his gun, but he was one man facing dozens, and more were coming: shopkeepers, farmers, even some of Barrett's own ranch hands who had children of their own. Eleanor fitted the crowbar to the chain. This is our school, she said, loud enough for all to hear. Built with our taxes, for our children. No one man has the right to lock it. She pulled. The chain held. She pulled harder, and felt other hands join hers. Maria, Mrs. Chen, the baker's wife. Together they strained against the metal that had kept their children from learning. With a sound like breaking bones, the chain snapped. The doors swung open, revealing the dusty classroom beyond. Sunlight flooded in, illuminating empty desks that had waited too long for students. Eleanor stepped inside, and the children followed like water finding its way home. School, Eleanor announced, her voice carrying across the square, is now in session. The crowd erupted in cheers that drowned out Morrison's protests. Children ran for the desks. Mothers embraced. Men nodded approval. And somewhere in the distance, gunfire ceased as even Barrett Cole's hired guns realized the real battle had been fought and won without a single shot. Eleanor stood in the doorway of her rightful classroom, watching it fill with eager faces. She thought of Rafe, drawing danger away so this moment could happen. Thought of Catherine Walsh, whose courage had planted seeds that finally bloomed. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Barrett Cole would rage. The council would convene. Threats would multiply like storm clouds. But today, children were learning. Today, a community had remembered its power. Today, the locked doors were open, and no force in the territory could close them again. The abandoned miner's shack clung to the hillside like a forgotten promise. Its tin roof rusted to the color of dried blood. Rain fell in sheets, turning the desert into a landscape of running mud and sudden streams. Eleanor pushed through the rotting door, water streaming from her cloak, and found Rafe sitting against the far wall, his left arm pressed tight against his ribs. You shouldn't have come, he said, but his eyes told a different story. Relief, perhaps even joy, quickly hidden behind practiced indifference. You shouldn't have drawn them away from the square. Eleanor knelt beside him, setting down her bag. Let me see. It's nothing, a scratch. Then you won't mind my looking at this scratch? She helped him shrug out of his coat, biting back a gasp at the blood soaking his shirt. The bullet had carved a furrow along his ribs, not fatal, but far from nothing. "There's water in that bucket," he said, gesturing with his good hand. "Rainwater, clean enough." Eleanor worked in silence, heating the water over the small fire he'd managed to build, tearing strips from her petticoat for bandages. The shack groaned under the storm's assault, but inside felt separate from the world, a pocket of warmth and unexpected intimacy. "You opened the school," he said as she cleaned the wound. It wasn't a question. "We opened the school. The mothers, the children, the whole community. You gave us the chance." His laugh turned into a wince. "Barrett must be spitting nails." "He came by this evening, stood in the doorway while I was teaching, just watching, didn't say a word, but his message was clear." She wrung out the cloth, the water running pink. "This is going to hurt." "I've had worse." She doubted that was true, given how his breath hitched when she pressed the cloth to the wound, but he didn't pull away, didn't complain, just watched her face as she worked, those dark eyes holding questions he didn't ask. "Tell me," she said, needing to fill the silence with something other than his controlled breathing and the storm's fury. "Tell me the truth about the water rights." So he did, his voice low and steady despite the pain. He told her about the Hernandez family, who'd ranched the river valley for 3 generations, about Barrett Cole's arrival 5 years ago, money from back east buying influence, respectability, power, about the surveyor who'd been bribed to redraw boundaries, moving the river onto Cole's land on paper if not in reality. "The Hernandez family had the original papers," Rafe said. "The Spanish grant, the Mexican confirmation after independence, even the American recognition after the war, all legal, all proper, but papers burn easily." The convenient fire Barrett mentioned. After they refused his last offer, the house, the barn, all those documents gone in one night, the family barely escaped. His jaw tightened. "Miguel Hernandez was my friend. We'd worked cattle together before Cole came. I was the one who suggested they hire a surveyor to confirm their boundaries, make everything official for American law." Eleanor's hand stilled on the bandage. "The surveyor whose journal you have. Thomas Brennan, an honest man," which was his mistake. He recorded everything Cole's attempts to bribe him, the threats when he refused, the truth about those boundaries. Cole had him killed, made it look like robbery, but Brennan was careful. He'd left copies with me. "So Cole named you an outlaw." "Easy enough. A Mexican-looking man who speaks Spanish, friends with the families Cole wanted gone, a few forged witnesses, a tame sheriff, and suddenly I'm a cattle thief and killer." His smile was bitter. "The $50 bounty is an insult. Really, I'd have thought I was worth more trouble than that." Eleanor finished wrapping the bandage, her fingers lingering on the warm skin of his shoulder. "Why stay? Why not leave the territory? Start over somewhere safe?" He caught her hand, held it gently. "Because running makes me guilty. Because those families deserve justice. Because—" He stopped, looked away. Because I'm a fool who thought if I stayed, fought in shadows, the truth would eventually surface." His thumb traced circles on her palm, the touch sending shivers through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Then you arrived." "I'm just a teacher." "No." He looked at her then, and the walls he kept so carefully constructed showed cracks. "Your hope, the first real hope this town has seen. You did in daylight what I couldn't do in 3 years of darkness. You united them." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "We need those documents. If we could get them to the territorial governor. Hidden, buried where Cole will never find them." He squeezed her hand. "But Eleanor, may I call you Eleanor? He won't let this stand. What happened today? Opening the school, defying him publicly. He'll escalate." "I know." She turned her hand in his, threading their fingers together. "I'm frightened." "Good. Fear keeps you careful, but you're also brave, and that terrifies him more than any gun I might carry." Thunder crashed overhead, and Eleanor realized how close they were sitting. She could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel his breath on her face. The moment stretched between them, charged as the storm outside. "I should go," she whispered, making no move to leave. "You should." His free hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a raindrop or tear. "This is dangerous. Eleanor, not just Cole and his guns. It makes everything more complicated." "I know." She leaned into his touch. "But I'm tired of simple, tired of safe, tired of men telling me what I should want or need or feel." "What do you want?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Eleanor thought of Barrett's possessive proposals, of Eastern suitors who'd seen her as an accessory to their ambitions. Then she looked at this man who risked everything to feed hungry families, who bled to give children a chance to learn. "This," she said, and kissed him. It was nothing like the polite pecks she'd endured at church socials. This was heat and need and promise, tasting of rain and courage and something wild that matched the storm's fury. His hand tangled in her wet hair, holding her close but gentle still, always gentle. When they broke apart, breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Eleanor, querida, this makes you a target." "I was already a target the moment I refused to be Barrett Cole's pet teacher." She traced the line of his jaw, feeling the slight roughness of stubble. "At least now I have something worth the risk." He caught her hand, pressed it flat against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. "I have nothing to offer you. No home, no safety, no future that doesn't include running or fighting or both. You have truth, justice, a heart that cares about hungry children and stolen families." She smiled through tears she didn't try to hide. "That's worth more than all Barrett Cole's silver." He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise more than passion. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. "The documents are buried beneath the old mission's cornerstone," he said. "The loose stone on the north side. If something happens to me—" "Nothing will happen to you." She gripped his hand tight. "We're going to win this. Together." "Together." He helped her to her feet, wincing at the movement. "But not tonight. Tonight, you go back before you're missed. Tomorrow, you teach those children like nothing's changed, and we wait." "For what?" "For Barrett Cole to make his next move. He has to now. His authority is cracked, and he'll do something desperate to seal it." Rafe pulled on his coat, covering the bandages. "When he does, we'll be ready." Eleanor gathered her things, hating to leave the warm circle of firelight for the cold storm outside. At the door, she turned back. "Rafe, what you said about me being hope for this town, you're wrong." His face fell slightly. Yes, we're hope, all of us together. That's what Barrett Cole should really fear." She left him standing by the dying fire, stepped out into the storm's embrace. The rain had gentled to a steady patter, and somewhere above the clouds, stars waited to shine again. Eleanor made her way down the treacherous path, her lips still warm from his kiss, her heart full of dangerous promises. Behind her, in the shelter she'd left, Rafe Moreno touched his fingers to his lips and allowed himself to believe that tomorrow might be different from all the yesterdays that had brought them here. Outside, the storm washed the desert clean, preparing the ground for whatever seeds their defiance had planted. Dawn painted the schoolyard in shades of rose and gold as Eleanor stood before the padlocked doors once more. But this time, she wasn't alone. 63 children waited with her, from tiny Sarah Martinez clutching her slate to Jake Sullivan standing protective near the younger ones. Their parents formed a circle around them, mothers with washing rough hands, fathers who'd left fields and shops to stand witness. The new chain Barrett Cole had installed overnight gleamed like a threat in the morning light. Beside it, a fresh notice proclaimed, "Closed by emergency order, structural concerns." Structural concerns. Eleanor read aloud, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. The only structural concern Mr. Cole has is the foundation of his lies cracking beneath him. She reached into her bag and withdrew what she'd retrieved from beneath the mission cornerstone in the pre-dawn darkness. A rolled document. Water-stained, but intact. Thomas Brennan's survey map, showing the true boundaries, the real flow of the river, the rightful owners of the land Barrett Cole claimed. "This morning," she announced, "we don't just open a school. We light a fire of truth that no amount of chains can contain." She held the map high, then touched a match to its corner. Gasps rose from the crowd. Why burn the evidence? But Eleanor smiled as the flames caught, consuming the paper in seconds. "Don't worry," she said, scattering the ashes like black snow. "That was a copy. The originals are safe. Multiple copies in multiple hands. Some already on their way to the territorial governor. Others hidden where Mr. Cole will never find them. But this," she gestured at the ashes settling on the schoolyard dirt. "This is a message. Truth is like fire. Try to stamp it out in one place. It springs up in another. This is destruction of property." Deputy Morrison pushed through the crowd, but his voice lacked conviction. Dark circles under his eyes suggested a sleepless night. "And that chain is legal. Legal like the theft of the Hernandez ranch." Eleanor pulled out another document. "Legal like the forged signatures on the water rights transfer, legal like the murder of Thomas Brennan, whose journal details every bribe Mr. Cole offered and every threat he made." Morrison paled. "You can't prove—" We can," Eleanor gestured to the crowd. "Mrs. Chen, would you share what you told me yesterday?" Samuel's mother stepped forward, voice trembling but determined. "Mr. Cole came to our restaurant 5 years ago. Said if my husband didn't sign papers saying he witnessed Miguel Hernandez stealing cattle, immigration officers would find problems with our documents. We signed. God forgive us. We signed lies because we were afraid." "Mrs. O'Brien." The baker's wife lifted her chin. "Barrett Cole holds the note on our shop. Last year, he said he'd call it due unless my Patrick swore he saw Rafe Moreno near the Brennan murder scene. We have 6 children. What choice did we have?" One by one, they came forward. Stories of intimidation, bribery, threats, the careful architecture of Barrett Cole's kingdom exposed in the morning light. Deputy Morrison's hand shook as he lowered it from his gun. "Even if all this is true," he said weakly, "that chain stays until—" "Until what?" Eleanor asked. "Until more children grow up without letters, until more families lose their land to forged documents, until the truth gets buried so deep, even God can't find it." She turned to the crowd. "Who stands with me?" Every hand rose, even some who'd been Barrett's men, like Tom Sullivan, Jake's father, who stepped forward with bolt cutters. "My boy needs schooling more than I need Cole's wages." "This is insurrection." Morrison backed away as Sullivan approached the chain. "I'll have to arrest—" "Then arrest us all," said Father Miguel from the mission, his cassock dusty from the walk. "But first, perhaps read this letter from the bishop, expressing concern about the spiritual welfare of children denied education. The church stands with these families. Deputy." Morrison looked around wildly, seeking support that wasn't coming. In the distance, dust clouds suggested riders approaching Barrett's reinforcements. No doubt, but the crowd didn't scatter. If anything, they pressed closer, forming a protective wall around their children. Sullivan's bolt cutters bit through the chain with a sound like breaking bones. The doors swung open, revealing the dusty classroom that had waited too long for life to return. Children surged forward, their voices rising like birds at dawn. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching desks fill, listening to the scratch of chalk on slates. Behind her, she heard horses arriving. Barrett Cole's voice raised in fury, but she didn't turn. Let him rage at her back. She had work to do. Mr. Cole. Father Miguel's calm voice cut through Barrett's threats. Before you do something rash, know that His Excellency the Bishop is very interested in this situation, as is the territorial governor, who should be receiving some enlightening documents by courier today. You dare. I dare stand with truth. The priest replied, as does this community. Your time of shadows is ending. Senor, accept it with grace, or be consumed by the light. Eleanor finally turned. Barrett sat his horse like a general surveying a battlefield he'd already lost. His gray suit was impeccable as always, but his face showed cracks, rage, fear, the desperation of a man watching his carefully constructed world crumble. You, he said, pointing at Eleanor. This is all you're doing. You've poisoned them against me. No, Mr. Cole. You poisoned yourself with greed and cruelty. I just held up a mirror. His hand moved toward his coat, and the crowd tensed. But before he could draw whatever weapon he carried, another voice rang out. I wouldn't, Cole. Rafe Moreno stepped from the mission shadows, and Eleanor's heart leaped despite the danger. He moved stiffly, the wound she'd tended still paining him, but his presence was steady as stone. Behind him emerged others, the Hernandez family, the Washingtons who'd lost their farm, the widow Taylor whose husband had asked too many questions. All the scattered victims of Barrett Cole's ambition gathered home. Morrison fumbled for his gun, but Rafe raised empty hands. I'm not armed. Deputy, just here to watch the school open. Education is important. Don't you think? You're under arrest. For what? Father Miguel interrupted. The false charges, Mr. Cole manufactured, I think, when the governor reads the evidence sent to him, including sworn statements from families forced to lie. Those charges will evaporate like morning dew. Barrett's face had gone the color of old ash. You can't prove anything. It's the word of Mexicans and criminals against documented evidence, multiple witnesses, and your own forged signatures. Eleanor said quietly, It's over, Mr. Cole. The only question is whether you leave with dignity or in chains. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Barrett's men, though still loyal, fingered their weapons. The crowd pressed closer together, ready to shield their children with their bodies if necessary. Then Jake Sullivan stepped out of the schoolhouse, chalk dust on his hands, chin high with newfound courage. Mr. Cole, I'm learning to write today. Real writing, not just copying. Miss Hart says I can write my own thoughts, my own truth. Isn't that something? The boy's simple words broke something in the morning air. One of Barrett's men lowered his gun, shaking his head. Another turned his horse away, like a dam breaking. His support crumbled as men chose conscience over wages. Barrett Cole sat alone on his expensive horse, emperor of nothing, king of ashes. His gray eyes found Eleanor's, and for an instant she saw the man he might have been ambitious, yes, but perhaps once capable of building instead of stealing. This isn't over, he said, but the words lacked force. Yes, Eleanor replied gently. It is. He turned his horse, riding away with what dignity remained. Morrison holstered his unused gun, mumbling something about needing to telegraph the sheriff. The crowd began to disperse, but slowly, reluctantly, savoring their victory. Rafe approached Eleanor, stopping a proper distance away, but their eyes said everything propriety wouldn't allow relief. Joy, promise. Thank you, she said simply. For what? You're the one who opened the school. Twice. For believing it was possible. For showing me the documents. For... She stopped, aware of listening ears. For everything. He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. De nada, maestra. Now go teach. Your students are waiting. Eleanor turned back to the schoolhouse, where 63 children sat at desks that had gathered dust too long. Through the windows, she could see their eager faces, Slates ready, minds hungry for knowledge that no man could chain away. She stepped inside, leaving footprints in the ashes of Barrett Cole's notice behind her. The sun climbed higher, burning away shadows, blessing the open doors with light that felt like redemption. "Good morning, students," she said, picking up her chalk. "Let's begin with a lesson about truth and the power of community, and why no lock forged can hold back the human spirit when it decides to be free." Outside, Rafe Moreno stood guard with others from the community, no longer an outlaw, but a protector of what they'd won. The school was open. The children were learning. And in Cibola Creek, the morning tasted of justice, sweet as rain after drought. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the canyon as Eleanor guided her borrowed mare along the narrow trail. Behind her, she could hear the thunder of hooves, the shouts of men who'd abandoned all pretense of law. Barrett Cole had made his final move if he couldn't have his kingdom. He'd burn it all down rather than see it flourish without him. There the canyon narrows ahead. Barrett's voice echoed off the rock walls. Eleanor pressed lower against her horse's neck, urging more speed from the tired animal. She'd known this was a trap the moment young Timothy Wells had arrived at the schoolhouse, breathless with a message supposedly from Rafe. But she'd come anyway, because if there was even a chance Rafe needed her. The trail split ahead left toward the dead-end box canyon, right toward the treacherous switchbacks of Devil's Backbone. Eleanor chose right, her mount scrambling over loose stones. Behind her, gunfire cracked, bullets whining off canyon walls like angry wasps. "Cut her off at the switchbacks," Barrett commanded. $500 to the man who brings her back." Eleanor's mind raced faster than her horse. She'd sent Maria to town with the real documents the moment she'd suspected a trap. But Barrett didn't know that. He thought she carried them, thought capturing her would end everything. Let him think it. The trail climbed sharply, her horse laboring. Eleanor could see the switchbacks ahead, a series of hairpin turns carved into the cliff face, barely wide enough for a single rider. But she could also see dust rising from the other direction. More riders, trying to trap her between them. Then, through the dust and chaos, she heard it a whistle, low and melodious, like a desert thrush. Her heart leaped. That was Rafe's signal, the one he'd taught her that night in the rain. She whistled back, 3 short notes, and was rewarded with movement above. Rafe appeared on the cliff edge, rope in hand. Not alone, the Hernandez brothers flanked him, rifles ready but not aimed. They wouldn't shoot unless forced. This had to end without bloodshed, or Barrett would become a martyr instead of a criminal. Eleanor the rope. Rafe's lasso snaked down, perfect as always despite his healing wound. Eleanor grabbed it, wrapping it around her waist as her horse stumbled on the treacherous trail. The animal screamed, going down, and Eleanor kicked free of the stirrups just as the mare tumbled off the path. For a moment she hung in space, nothing but air and a 1,000-foot drop beneath her. Then the rope went taut, and strong hands pulled her up, away from the bullets and the fury below. "I've got you," Rafe whispered as he hauled her over the edge. "I've got you, querida." The documents. Safe? Maria reached Father Miguel an hour ago, but Cole doesn't know that. He helped her to her feet, keeping one arm around her waist. "Can you ride?" "Always." Below, Barrett's men had reached the spot where Eleanor's horse had fallen. They milled in confusion, some attempting to follow the narrow trail up, others arguing about the wisdom of pursuing armed men on foot in their own territory. "Cole," Rafe called down. "It's finished. The governor has your papers, your forged deeds, the testimony of everyone you've wronged. Give up now, and you might see trial instead of a rope." Barrett Cole sat his stallion like a statue, looking up at the cliff where his carefully built empire had finally crumbled. His face was marble. All emotion burned away, leaving only cold calculation. "You think you've won," he called back. "You think one teacher and one Mexican bandit can destroy what I've built." "Not one teacher," Eleanor said. stepping forward despite Rafe's protective grip. "A whole town, every person you stepped on, every family you robbed, every child you tried to keep ignorant. We all destroyed what you built, Mr. Cole, because it was built on sand." "Riders coming." Miguel Hernandez pointed east, where a dust cloud announced multiple horsemen approaching fast. "Many riders." Barrett smiled then, cold as winter. "My reinforcements from the Double Bar C, 30 men, Miss Hart, armed men who know their pay depends on me. What will your community do against the territorial marshal?" A new voice rang across the canyon. "Not much, I expect." The riders crested the ridge, and Eleanor's heart soared. At their head rode a man with a federal badge, behind him a full posse, and beside the marshal, Father Miguel on his steady mule, worn from hard riding but triumphant. "Marshal Thompson," the lawman announced. "Mr. Cole, I have warrants for your arrest. Fraud, intimidation, conspiracy to commit murder, theft of federal lands. You'll come quietly, or you'll come over a saddle. Your choice." Barrett's men looked at each other. Calculating odds. 30 ranch hands against federal marshals was no contest, especially when their pay was no longer certain. One by one, they lowered their weapons. "This is all lies," Barrett said, but his voice had lost its power. "Fabrications by jealous." "Save it for the judge." Marshal Thompson cut him off. "Though, given the evidence the good father showed me, including your own signature on conflicting documents, I doubt any judge will listen long." Eleanor felt Rafe's hand find hers. Squeeze gently. They watched from the cliff as Barrett Cole was relieved of his weapons, his hands bound, his kingdom reduced to the length of a jail cell. "Wait," Eleanor called down. The marshal looked up, shading his eyes. "There's something Mr. Cole should know." She reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded paper. "This arrived yesterday from the teaching placement agency. They were very interested to hear about Catherine Walsh's experience here. Apparently, she wasn't the first teacher to flee a position after refusing Mr. Cole's advances. There are 5 others willing to testify." If Barrett had looked defeated before, this news shattered him completely. His empire of land and cattle was one thing, but his reputation, the respectable gentleman rancher, that was everything. Without it, he was just another thief with pretensions. They took him away in silence, his men following meekly. Some would face charges, others would drift to new ranges, new chances. The Double Bar C would be broken up, its stolen portions returned to rightful owners, the rest sold to pay restitution. Eleanor stood on the cliff edge, watching the procession disappear into the distance. The sun was setting, painting the canyon in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful and harsh, like the land itself. "It's over," she said softly. "No," Rafe corrected, turning her to face him. "It's beginning. The school is open. The families have their land back. The truth is known." He cupped her face gently. "You did this, Eleanor. You brought light to our darkness." "We did this," she corrected. "All of us." He kissed her then, there on the cliff edge with the sunset blazing around them, not stolen in shadow or secret, but openly, freely, in front of Miguel and his brothers who grinned and politely looked away. When they broke apart, Eleanor laughed, giddy with relief and possibility. "So, what happens now? The notorious outlaw Rafe Moreno is dead. Who are you, really?" "Rafael Moreno Hernandez," he said formally. "Surveyor, when anyone would hire me. Cowhand when they wouldn't. Fighter for justice when necessary." His eyes sparkled. "And completely, hopelessly in love with the bravest teacher in the territory." Only the territory. "The world, mi amor, the whole world." They made their way down from the cliff as stars began to appear. Eleanor rode behind Rafe on his horse, arms wrapped around his waist, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her hands. The Hernandez brothers sang as they rode, old Spanish songs about love and land and freedom. Tomorrow there would be work teaching children, rebuilding what Barrett had destroyed, creating the community Cibola Creek was meant to be. There would be challenges, setbacks, the slow work of healing. But tonight, Eleanor Hart rode through the desert with the man she loved, toward a town where children would learn and families would prosper, and justice had finally found its way home. The stars above were bright as promises, and every hoofbeat sang the same word, free, free, free. Behind them, the canyon held its secrets. Ahead, the lights of Cibola Creek beckoned like a constellation come to earth, waiting to welcome them home. The morning sun blessed the new schoolhouse with golden light, its fresh-cut pine boards still fragrant with resin and possibility. Eleanor stood in the doorway, watching families arrive for the dedication, children racing ahead with excitement, parents following with baskets for the community meal. Everyone dressed in their Sunday best despite it being Saturday. "Never thought I'd see this day," Maria said, arranging wildflowers in mason jars along the windowsills. A real school, built by the town, for all the children. 6 months had passed since Barrett Cole's arrest. 6 months of healing, rebuilding, discovering what Cibola Creek could become when fear no longer ruled its streets. The old schoolhouse had been torn down, too many dark memories in those walls. This new building rose from community effort, every family contributing what they could labor, lumber, love. "Miss Eleanor," Sarah Martinez ran up, clutching a folded paper. "I wrote you something." Eleanor knelt to the child's level, accepting the gift with proper solemnity. Sarah's letters, once crooked and uncertain, now marched across the page with confidence. "Thank you for teaching me to read. Now I can teach my little sister." "That's beautiful, Sarah. And yes, you can teach her. That's how knowledge spreads one person to another, like light passing from candle to candle." "Eleanor." She turned at Rafe's voice, her heart still skipping after all these months. He stood with Father Miguel, both men dusty from helping set up tables in the yard. Rafe had been officially cleared of all charges, even received compensation for his years of false persecution. He'd used the money to help families Barrett had cheated, keeping only enough to start his surveying business again. "Father Miguel has something to ask you," Rafe said, his eyes dancing with barely contained joy. The priest cleared his throat. "Señorita Hart, the town council, the new council, properly elected, has a proposition. They wish to offer you a permanent position, not just as teacher, but as head of education for the district. 3 new schools are planned as the railroad comes through." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I'm honored. Of course I accept." "There's more," Father Miguel continued, glancing at Rafe. "The position comes with a house, the old Brennan place. If you want it. The town feels it's fitting Thomas Brennan died defending truth, and you brought truth back to life." The Brennan house sat on a hill overlooking the valley, with room for gardens, perhaps children of her own someday. Eleanor had walked past it often, imagining curtains in the windows, roses by the door. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Then, perhaps," Rafe said, dropping to one knee right there in the dusty yard, "you'd consider sharing it with a reformed outlaw who promises to survey only honest boundaries and love only one teacher for the rest of his days." The crowd that had been pretending not to watch gave up all pretense. Children giggled. Women dabbed their eyes. Men nodded approval. Even Jake Sullivan, no longer too cool for sentiment, grinned wide. Eleanor looked down at Rafe, this man who'd hidden in shadows to help others, who'd risked everything for justice, who'd shown her that courage came in many forms. "Rafael Moreno Hernandez," she said formally. "I would be honored to share that house, that life, and all the tomorrows that come after." He slipped a ring on her finger, not the ostentatious diamond Barrett would have chosen, but a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone, bright as New Mexico sky. When he stood and kissed her, The crowd erupted in cheers that could probably be heard at the old coal ranch. Now, Eleanor laughed, pulling back. We have a school to dedicate. Romance can wait. But she kept hold of Rafe's hand as they entered the building. Inside, everything was ready. Neat rows of desks, a proper blackboard, shelves already filling with donated books, maps on the walls showing the wide world waiting to be discovered. Eleanor moved to the blackboard, picked up a piece of chalk white as promises, white as new beginnings. She wrote in her clear teacher's script, "The truth shall make you free." Who knows what this means? She asked the assembled students. Hands shot up. She called on Samuel Chen, who stood straight and proud. It means when we know true things, nobody can trap us with lies. Excellent. Emma. It means learning sets us free to be who we really are, not who others say we should be. One by one, the children shared their understanding. Their parents listened with wonder. These children who'd been denied education now spoke with wisdom beyond their years. Finally, Eleanor turned to the adults. This school belongs to all of us. Every child in this district is welcome, regardless of wealth, background, or birthplace. We teach reading, writing, arithmetic, but also thinking, questioning, seeking truth, because an educated community is a free community. And a dangerous one to those who profit from ignorance, added Mr. Washington, whose family had reclaimed their farm, which is why we'll guard this school like the treasure it is. The dedication continued with songs, prayers from Father Miguel, and stories from the elders about education in their home countries. The Hernandez family spoke of schools in Old Mexico. The Chens shared traditions from Canton. The O'Briens recalled hedge schools in Ireland, where learning survived despite oppression. As the sun climbed higher, the formal ceremony gave way to celebration. Tables groaned under the weight of community offerings, tamales from the Mexican families, Irish stew from the O'Briens, delicate dumplings from the Chens, cornbread and beans from the ranch families. Children played in the yard while adults made plans for the future. Eleanor found a quiet moment with Rafe by the spring behind the school, the same spring where they'd met that midnight months ago, where truth had begun its patient work of erosion on Barrett Cole's empire of lies. No regrets, Rafe asked, pulling her close. How could I regret this? She gestured at the scene children learning. Families united, a community choosing hope over fear. Though I do sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd accepted that first teaching position in Boston. You'd have taught there brilliantly, Rafe said. But Boston has many teachers. Cibola Creek needed Eleanor Hart. And Eleanor Hart needed Cibola Creek, needed you. She touched the bandana in his pocket, the same one he'd given her that day with the runaway horse, now carried as a token. I came here to teach, but I learned so much more. About courage, about community, about love that asks nothing but gives everything. Speaking of teaching, Rafe said with a smile, I have 30 families who want surveying lessons. Seems they want to understand their land boundaries properly, never be cheated again. I could use an assistant who knows how to explain complex things simply. Are you offering me a second job, Mr. Moreno? I'm offering you a partnership, Miss Hart, in all things. They sealed the promise with a kiss as children's laughter echoed across the valley. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, but here in Cibola Creek, the sun shone bright on new beginnings. That evening, as families headed home, Eleanor stood again in the doorway of the schoolhouse. On the blackboard, beneath, "The truth shall make you free." Students had added their own words throughout the day: justice, esperanza, community, love, tomorrow. Rafe joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. What are you thinking? That first day, when I saw the locked school, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake coming here. Now I know it was the best decision I ever made. She leaned back against him. Though I never expected to fall in love with an outlaw. Former outlaw, he corrected. Now just a simple surveyor who measures boundaries and courts school teachers. Nothing simple about you, Rafael Moreno. Nothing simple about us, he agreed. But the best things rarely are. As they closed the schoolhouse door, Eleanor touched the key at her throat, not hiding it now, but wearing it proudly. Tomorrow she would open these doors again, and children would stream in eager to learn. Tomorrow she and Rafe would start planning their wedding, their life together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new possibilities. But tonight, walking hand in hand toward their future, Eleanor Hart knew she had found her place, not just as a teacher, but as part of something larger, a community that had chosen courage over fear, truth over comfortable lies, love over the safety of isolation. The stars came out one by one above Cibola Creek, each a point of light in the darkness, and in the new schoolhouse. Chalk dust settled on floors that would know the footsteps of generations, all of them free to learn, to question, to become whatever their hearts and minds could imagine. The locked doors were open. The truth had set them free. And in the high desert of New Mexico territory, love had built something that no force could chain or destroy, a future bright as morning, strong as the mountains, and as endless as the sky above. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what touched your heart in Eleanor and Rafe's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of courage, truth, and love conquering fear, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more listeners discover this story of how one brave teacher and a falsely accused man brought justice to a frontier town. Until our next adventure in the Old West, keep riding toward your own horizons.